Okay, I'm here with Steven Anderson, the author of the Seductive Interaction Design book and the Get Metal Notes card deck. Welcome. It's really good to have you, Steven.
Great to be here.
Thank you. In your book, Seductive Interaction Design, you speak about delighters that surprise users. So, what are delighters, and how can you use them to influence user behavior?
Sure.
I'll keep the mic.
All right. So delighters, actually, the term itself comes from the hospitality industry, the hotels and such. And it's, if you think of the classic chocolate on your pillow when you check in, or more recently I've seen companies give fresh, hot, warm baked chocolate chip cookies when you check in. Those would be delighters. And the key thing to remember is delighters are things that are not expected, because if you expect them, it's not a surprise, it's not a delight. Mm-hmm. And it's things that, like, even if you weren't asking for it, you wouldn't normally want it. Like, maybe I didn't want the chocolate. Just the fact that it's there, like, puts a smile on people's faces. And most times people do want a chocolate or chocolate chip cookie. But yeah, I think it's just that extra gift, the extra thought. I order a lot of stuff online, and you know, like, you get something from eBay, but if someone takes the extra time to throw in a sticker or throw in the extra thing, it can often just create a delightful moment. Okay,
and do you know of any more online examples of delighters that you particularly liked?
Gosh. So, I mean, a lot of them I'm seeing in their animation. So some are literal. Like, there's, I think it's Photo Dojo has a thing where, like, you pull the page. It says, don't pull this handle, and you pull it, and some things happen. So there's some that are very explicit like that. I'm seeing a lot more subtle delighters, particularly on mobile devices, in the form of animations or the way things come in or leave. So it's not so obvious, like a joke or something. It's just more the way things do it. Yesterday, I was using the Kickstarter mobile app, which I've been using for months now. And on my profile page, I actually pulled down, and there was a kind of a hidden section I've never seen before. And so there was that moment of discovery. And it was basically, there's a little wedge or this pie chart that's almost like a Trivial Pursuit, the wedges that they use to show you where you've invested or what types of projects you funded. So it's not core to the experience, it's not critical, but when I pulled this page, it actually had it in the mobile app. And it was just a delightful experience to discover it there. I'd never known it was there, and I think that was probably one of those things where, like, you know, if people find it, great. If they never see it, it's okay. It doesn't hurt anything. And so it wasn't a joke. It wasn't anything humorous. It was just that moment where I was like, aha, I found something, and it created that feeling of delight.
Okay, and one of my favorite subjects in your book, Seductive Interaction Design, is about curiosity. So how can you do you have an example of how you can design for curiosity and how to design for curiosity?
Yeah, so that's a bit trickier. Curiosity itself is a really difficult subject. Like, we all know what it means for something to be curious, but if I asked everyone to write a definition down, it's really hard. Like, how would you define curiosity? And I think one of the seminal papers on this was from a researcher named George Lowenstein, and I believe it was 94. He wrote what's called the information gap theory. And his take on curiosity is basically you're creating a gap in people's knowledge between what they know, and now you're creating a gap between something they don't know. And as long as it's relevant, like personal, for example, is of importance here, people will desire to close this gap. So it creates a gap that we didn't have before, and now we have this longing, this urge to close the gap.
Do you have an example of this information gap?
Yeah. So off-world or offline example, off-world. We're in sci-fi now. Offline example that, and these are examples from the book, but my kids, I have several boys, and we used to go to the store, and there would be Hot Wheels. And one of the things that Hot Wheels did for many years is, you know, in this sea of Hot Wheel options, they would have.
My boy loves those.
Yep, and they're cheap too. Like, as parents buying gifts for kids, it's like $1, right? They had the mystery Hot Wheel. And it was black box, and there wasn't one mystery Hot Wheel, there were multiple. And so my kids, if I gave them $1, this was my informal, research here. If I gave them $1, they would buy the mystery Hot Wheel. If I gave them $2, they'd buy the mystery Hot Wheel and then a car of their choosing. So I think that's a real world example. Online, it's trickier. I think anytime you're teased with partial information. So I know LinkedIn will tell you a little bit about the type of people or who've looked at your profile in the past week, but they lead you to believe if you want to know more and to get more details around who's actually looking at your profile, you need to pay up and create an account. So that's an online example I use. Netflix has this area where I should back up for a second. Netflix, their entire site is all about ratings and getting you ratings, and I would say they've reached a point now where they have enough saturation on ratings that it's not one of their primary goals. But for many years, that was it. Like, we want to get people to rate wherever they're at in the site, and you can rate a movie anywhere you're at. But the number one area where most people rate is this area where it says, it'll show a movie you just watched, and it says rate rate this movie to reveal 2 more that you'll like. And the fact that it has sort of the 2 empty boxes there, and it says uses the word reveal, the copy there, it says, like, we have something here, and as soon as you do this, we'll flip it around. So it's just their algorithms doing recommendations, which happens anywhere on the site. But I think framed as a, sort of, we have something behind the curtain here, and if you want to know what it is, you have to rate the last movie you saw. I think you see a lot more engagement, and their numbers, like, they've seen engagement through the roof on that.
It's nice. I read a research paper the other day by the University of Leiden that showed that whenever you've made people curious about something, they will actually remember it better as well. So I really dig curiosity because it's such a nice thing to play with. And how about, so you write about seduction. How about online seduction? So websites that aren't seductive, is there some element that you can say, oh, this is guaranteed to be missing in non-seductive websites? Is there such a thing?
Oh, gosh. A little bit hard. I mean, I will say in the past few years, just the quality of sites in general, and this may be my biases coming from the startup world, but the quality of sites has just gotten better and better. And so I see a lot of really good sites that, have a clear focused message. They have their 3 benefits to me, and their value prop is made obvious, and then they want me to sign up. I would say with those types, I think if anything, the patterns are so common that they're almost getting mundane. Like, where I'm like, oh, okay, another headline with 3 features and all that, and so now the sites that are sticking out to me are the ones that surprise me or break the mold in a certain way. And it's interesting to say, because there are a lot of big companies and businesses that still haven't gotten to that level of clarity, and so it's definitely something to do. But the template I'm talking about, the big hero image, and then the things below, and then, designed to be very friendly on a mobile device as well. But those templates are so ubiquitous now. Is
there one that surprised you recently, like breaking the mold and doing something different?
Gosh, so I think, like, those that integrate, there are some, and there are dozens that have surprised me. And of course, I can't remember right now, but ones that, like, as you scroll, like I know a lot of the parallax interactions and the moving stuff gets criticized a lot for good reason, but I know a lot of those where you scroll and you see things moving, like, those tend to engage at least my visual interest. I think ones that are a little more functional, where as you start to scroll, like an animation starts playing, it's a video explaining what they do, where it's not an embedded YouTube, but they've actually integrated the video in a nice way. Those have caught my attention. Sometimes just, a different service. Here's one that does come to mind. thegrid.io is this new service. It claims to be revolutionary. It's still very much vaporware. It's not a product you can actually use. But basically what they're promising to do is, through the magic of algorithms and artificial intelligence, you throw content at their system, and they will decide the best layout for the content. And so it's kind of saying, gone are the days of, like, all the custom web design and web templates and all that. Like,
is it like a machine doing this, or are actually people?
Algorithms. Yeah, they're focusing on algorithms and programs. And some people are skeptical about the ability to do this. I know I've looked at things like, help me here, not Pinboard, what's the magazine? The
Flipboard?
Flipboard, yeah. I know I've read some articles about their algorithms where at one point they had 20 different templates, and they focused a lot more on the algorithms and the intelligence there. And they now have, based on the recipes and the code, they can have 20,000 different layouts. And so they'll look at things like, they'll take a photo and they'll do facial recognition and detect, like, is there a face? And when they go to crop it for different media sizes, they'll crop it, making sure the face is always centered. Or if there are multiple faces, they kind of span that. So, I mean, there's some really intelligent stuff with how you frame or crop a photo or scale it or do these different things. And so I'm looking at that and saying, if the grid has similar algorithms, like, this could be a revolutionary product.
So this will automatically design your website for you?
Pretty much, on the fly. And then if you want to overwrite it and customize it, you can do that if you know, I guess, some markup language, HTML, CSS. But that's the promise, and you watch their story, and it's pretty compelling. They're pre-selling it right now, so I think they got some amount of funding, but then they're pre-selling a subscription. I think if you pay now, it's like $8 a month, and you pay for a year. And otherwise, if you wait till it comes out, it's $25 a month, which is quite a bit more. And I'm looking at it and thinking, okay, less than $100, should I secure my spot and have my, you'll get that price for life, basically. And then I'm like, wait a second, I'm putting money down on something I've never even seen. It could not deliver. But so far,
Can't play with it yet?
Can't play with it yet. But even with that, in the absence of playing with it, you've had, I think they're coming up on 10,000 people who've given them $100 or something.
So does this process language? So it probably uses some kind of algorithm to figure out what the text says in order to put it on a page?
It looks at text length, looks at images. I mean, they don't talk too much about it, but basically it looks at your content, whatever you put, and decides how to best represent it.
Just for English?
I don't know yet. I mean, nothing to play with. I would assume, Silicon Valley, they're probably very English focused at this point. Yeah, it looks to be pretty revolutionary. And it's just in terms of a teaser site that, I mean, like I said, you've got 10,000 people who've given it $100 sight unseen, just on the promise. And that's pretty impressive.
That sounds really interesting. I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, it's thegrid.io.
Okay, the grid.io. So you talked at the conference here, and in your talk you spoke about paths and sandboxes as ways to influence behavior. Do you know of an example of a website that has? So for starters, can you tell us what paths and sandboxes are briefly, and do you know of an example of a website that uses this because they're really smart? It's a really smart way to interact with users.
Yep. So just to define them, I kind of held up two games that I've played a lot of. Candy Crush is one that I was embarrassed to admit. Held up as an example of a path, and Minecraft as an example of a sandbox. And the basic idea, and I looked at this topic through the lens of games, through the lens of education, through the lens of product design. The basic idea is paths are applying all the psychology and things we know about human behavior to get people to do essentially what we want them to do. And there are all sorts of areas, whether you're talking about online conversion on a sign-up page, or whether you're talking about a restaurant trying to make sure it has the same experience every night. Like these are paths. Casinos obviously are very well-designed paths, but so is Walt Disney World, and the experience they designed there. If you go to sandboxes, these are much more open, generative spaces where you might have some ideas around what people will do, but it's a sandbox. People are going to play, people are going to create, people are going to do things that amaze you. And so Minecraft, as an example, like most of what's been done, I doubt not the inventor could have ever predicted. It's just, I mean, people are making these amazing things, building the Star Trek Enterprise, USS Enterprise inside of Minecraft, all this crazy creative stuff. And so that's the fundamental difference. As far as sites doing that, so the sites I hold up in my talk, and this is what really kind of sparked the idea, I was looking at Minecraft, I was looking at Twitter, and I was looking at Pinterest as for psychology triggers and things they use, and very much focused on the tactics. And in doing those, or in doing an assessment of those three experiences, it led me to conclude that, okay, a lot of the things I'd normally zero in on, like the triggers and the curiosity and all this, a lot of it was emergent from social interactions and the behavior. And what's common among sandboxes are they're a platform, meaning people can use them in many different ways. There's not a prescribed way to do it or use it. And the flip side of that, of course, is a lot of people go and they'll look at something like Pinterest in the early days and be like, why would I ever use this? What's the value? Same with Twitter, same with Minecraft. You still have people who have heard about Minecraft, they go to play it, and right away they're like, what's the goal? How do I win? What's the objective? And Minecraft is just not that kind of game. So they're a platform, but you learn how to use these systems from other people, watching others. They're very social, and they expose the behaviors of others. So now, like, you see people using a hashtag on Twitter, and so you start using a hashtag, and a year later, Twitter actually makes that part of the product. But that was an emergent behavior that people did. I see my wife creating a Pinterest board, and it gives me ideas of the types of boards I could create. So.
So it sounds like the difference between paths and sandboxes. Like if you want people to convert on your website, like to make them do stuff on your website, like to use them to help them make a decision and convert into clients. Paths seems like the way to go.
Yeah.
So do you know of a nice example? You mentioned casinos and restaurants and Walt Disney World as examples in the offline world.
Yeah.
So in the online world, do you remember an example of a website that successfully used paths?
Oh, I mean, that's most of what we're talking about. An event like this, Conversion Hotel, where I mean, that's a lot of the talk's been is how do we tweak the things, get people going, decrease the registration page from 4 to 3 pages. Like, what can we do to create a path? So I'd say most of our work is paths, and if anything, the new thing or the other perspective would be sandboxes. But yeah, I mean, most like registration is the classic example of a path, getting people to sign up, provide their information, things of that nature. I know I've found, and it's nothing new, but the less you ask for, the more you tend to get engagement. And I've found sites that have even reduced it where maybe they're asking for 3 or 4 fields, but they spread them across 3 or 4 moments or states. So it's like, oh, get started, just give us your email address. I'm like, oh, okay, that's easy. So I type in my email address. Oftentimes, Google Chrome automates that, right? So I just type in S and put it in there, and then it kind of flips a little bit and says, oh, and what's your password going to be? So they've even taken the experience of fill out these 4 fields, and they've broken it across to 1 field at a time, but these frictionless moments. And I mean, that was one of the newer things I've seen recently, where I've looked at some of our own sign-up processes and have asked myself, oh, what if we do something like this, where it's just give us this one piece of information, and now this, and one more thing, right? And by the time you give that first piece of information, you're already committed. And so it's like, okay, and I'll do my password, and okay, you need one other piece of information, that's fine. So yeah.
So ways to improve your conversion process would be also to look at it as a path and with different steps, and how can we improve each different step and tiny sub-steps and all remove friction?
Yep. That definitely. Wizards. So one interesting hybrid. My new book talks a lot more about. It's kind of a different topic. It's about how people make sense of the world, and I talk a lot about these visual tools that you can play with.
It's called Designing for Understanding, right?
Designing for Understanding. Yep. Or Design for Understanding.
Is it already out there?
No, next year. So I'm writing it right now.
2015.
2015. Thank you for that. It gets into tools that we can play with, and through playing we get feedback and we learn and understand. That's a big part of the book, and those are very sandbox environments. But if you go out to people and you talk about data visualization and information visualization, even in something that's really personally relevant, like in the States, choosing health insurance, which is a very complex process. And I've proposed ways we could create tools where people could put their data in, they could play, and through playing, find the best match, the best plan. But, everything we know about human behavior, people just want to be told what the right thing is, or most people want to be told, like, just tell me which plan's best for me. And so what I propose, which is kind of a hybrid of the paths and sandboxes, is maybe a short series of questions, like a wizard or a path, that land you then on this play space, the sandbox, with your recommendations. And so at that point, for the majority of people who just want to be told what is the best plan for them, based on their needs, they can stop there and say, okay, sign me up, right? But for those who want to know, well, what were the other options you didn't show me, or why did you recommend this to me, who want to really understand, they can then start to play with the defaults, the personalized defaults, and actually start to understand why those recommendations were made. And maybe those were the right ones, maybe there's something that's a better fit, because again, we're talking machines and computation. And so to me, that's a great way to blend the sort of path with the sandbox, recognizing that not everyone has been trained to play and is comfortable playing. A lot of people are very fearful about clicking buttons and doing things like that.
Do you have another example of an online or offline example of designing for understanding? Because you're full of these kind of examples and case studies. So do you know of another one?
Yeah, tons of examples. So kind of following with the path into the sandbox, there's a site called Wealthfront, and they may have updated their page since I captured this example. But it's a site for investing your money. And it's targeted at the new millionaires the new Facebook millionaires. That's kind of their target audience. But it's the young professionals who now are sitting on millions of dollars who aren't really sure how to invest it. And they take you to a 10-step question, a kind of a wizard process. And at the end of that, it recommends, or it tells you what your risk tolerance is and gives you a score. And that risk tolerance, whether it's like 7.2 or 8.5 or 4 point, whatever, it recommends a mix of investments in your investment strategy. And so that's the wizard or the path part. And then from there, you can play with the risk tolerance level and see how the investment mix would change based on your tolerance for risk. So that would be an example. In the talk I just gave today, I mentioned the example Brett Victor shares in his keynote on inventing on principle. And it's an example of a code editor where in real time you can actually change the values of the numbers and actually see the effect, which sounds...
So you see code and on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side you see the tree growing.
The tree growing, the change to the thing. And that's just scratching the surface of what he's talking about. The fundamental thing he's getting to, which is very similar to the book I'm working on, is the learning and the understanding that comes when we close the feedback loop, when we can actually work with tools and see the effect of what we're doing. And he even talks about, a traditional craftsman, would work with stuff, and if something, broke the wood and has splintered the wood in a certain way, like you saw it right away. One example I've heard, which is really great for pointing out how hilarious our code environments are, is imagine sitting down to play piano and you hit that note and you actually don't hear the sound until 2 minutes later. It would be ridiculous, and you'd be really hard to learn how to play piano that way. But that's how most of our coding environments are, where you have to make the change, save it.
And content management systems.
Content management systems, compile, do all that stuff. Go from edit mode, or go from edit mode to view mode, do all this stuff. There's a lot of latency between making a change and seeing the effect. And in his example, like you have sliders, so in the span of, we're talking like about 20 seconds, you see 500 different options. If I asked you to show me 500 different options just through changing the value, hitting submit, refresh, we would be here all day. I think closing or tightening the feedback loop between the actions we take and the effects, like that's a huge way to facilitate understanding. It's from a brain perspective, then you're seeing patterns. You're seeing how things move and change. You're like, oh, I get what that does now, or I see the effect of that. And so that's part of what leads to understanding, is seeing those patterns.
Okay, really interesting. And in your previous book, you talk about 5 motivators for that make games so extremely addictive. Like you confess that you are 7 months free of Candy Crush Saga now, and do you know of an example of a website or an app that uses like these gamification motivators?
Oh gosh, so I was looking at games when I wrote that. I was looking at games and gamification. This was 2010 when I was writing that chapter. Was the big thing, and my focus has always been around figure out what makes games work. And it's not the badges and the leaderboards and the surface superficial stuff. And in the model I drew in the book, I basically had that as the outer layer, the sugar coating, if you will. But I said what makes a game work is when you scratch beneath the surface of the badges and the leaderboards and the different trappings like that. Like, we enjoy games because they're fun, or they tap into curiosity, or there's a challenge, there's all these things. And so the model is basically start with what is the core motivation. And I think in the book I mentioned a challenge or curiosity. And then from there, like in the course of a challenge, you want a feedback loop on that, and there's different levels. But the main thing was just by the time you get to the external trappings, a lot of the stuff that people talk about with game mechanics, like that's not what makes something a fun game. You can put those on, but if there have been bad games that have those things, and people tend to forget that.
What does make it addictive?
So I like to start. I actually am using the word gameful, or actually more often playful these days, because I think there's a danger in designing a game. In fact, in the talk Paths to Sandboxes, I talk about the difference between a game to be played versus a space in which to play. And the difference there is, like, we create a game, and the moment we have a game, whether it's a literal game or whether it's a game like, hey, your job as business, whatever, is to hit this number. The moment we make something a game like that, people will game it and hack it and figure out ways to hit those metrics in ways that maybe weren't what we intended or hoped. And so I wanted to draw a distinction between gaming something versus playing. And a play doesn't necessarily have hard rules or objectives, but if you can create a space where people are playing, I mean, you're tapping then into intrinsic motivation. And going back to the paths versus sandboxes theme, a lot of what I talked about was playing is learning, learning is playing.
Like in Montessori schools?
Montessori, yeah. I talk about Montessori, that was actually my background. And when you reframe things in terms of it's all just play, I don't even know how it works now in retrospect, but we didn't have grades in Montessori. The teacher just knew us.
Really?
Nope, no grades, no grading system, so no ABC, which is kind of nice in a way because it's not all about getting the grade. It's really just about the joy of learning and the joy of discovery, which I think is a more valuable thing. And the teacher in the back of her mind knew what my strengths and weaknesses were and knew to kind of how to coach and direct me, but there was no like, oh, Stephen, you got a 73 on that paper. Nothing like that happening.
So what was your favorite recent example of a playful app or website?
All right. Well, definitely Minecraft. I continue to find Pinterest fun.
How about, I'm a commercial dog. So how about commercial websites that use like these playful elements to sell more?
I think So I spend a lot of my time on startup websites, and I think any site that lets you play and kick the tires, especially before you have to create an account, I think is really good. And I'm having trouble again bringing an specific example to mind, but there are a lot more sites now that are okay letting you just dive in and play. It'll come to me in a few minutes. As soon as we stop the tape rolling, I'll think of examples.
So last question. How about the role of, my background is a copywriter, so how about the role of wording and words and copy when motivating users, for example, in online interfaces of websites or apps? How do you have any favorite learnings of recent years? Yeah,
I don't know if there's any new or favorite or fresh things. I mean, I think it's a lot of the timeless stuff that still needs to be practiced. So, asking things in the form of a question engages the brain the same way using you does. Keeping things short online and scannable, especially like I think about mobile, like email subjects, and now on mobile devices, just how little you see of the first phrase. And so I always try to make sure the unique word or the unique thing is like in the first 15 characters or, somewhere thereabouts. And yeah, I think there are those things which, I mean, aside from the character constraints, which are driven to some degree by technology, a lot of just what makes good copy is timeless. And I still see a lot of people commit the same mistakes where you put lots of content on the page, but you don't make it scannable. I think I heard the phrase visual copywriting this morning, which I think I'm going to start using that. That makes a lot of sense.
Using bullet points, large headers.
Bullet points, headers, just information design, if you will, like taking just the straight up text and maybe what was 2 or 3 very boring paragraphs now becomes a 2-sentence opener with 3 bullets and then a bolded statement. And I even find myself just on internal documents where I'm trying to sell an idea. I might brainstorm the 7 benefits or 7 reasons why we should go with direction B over direction A. And then I'll go back and I know just a sentence, like 7 sentences is too much. So I'll try to pull out like a 1 or 2 word phrase to sum that up. And I know, like, as far as conversations go, if I can do that phrase, then people can say, well, like when you said blank, and they'll use that phrase, whereas reciting the whole sentence would be a lot more difficult. But these are timeless things that go back to classic advertising methods. So nothing really new, just a lot of the old that still has not been applied or applied evenly. If anything, I will say I'm working a lot more with teachers, public school teachers, and there's definitely a lot of distrust of things that come from on high, from like principals or from the state. And one of the things we're paying a lot more attention to is not just usable text, like things that are clear and compelling or even persuasive text, but we're really thinking a lot more about the teacher perspective and about our framing. So what does a specific word choice suggest? Are we speaking the language that teachers use, or do we sound like that outside vendor trying to sell them something? And really, I mean, we are building tools to help teachers. That is our fundamental goal. About a third of the people on the team are former teachers. And so we're writing in the way we would want to be spoken to as teachers, and not, we're kind of, we talk a lot about being too salesy or not, and that's a concern of ours, like, because anything that seems like you're trying to sell to teachers, like, turns people off, is what we found. And we're, there's a difference between being salesy versus being compelling because you really believe in it. And that's the thing we're working on in our copy and in our presentation, is we believe in this product. We believe in these services. We built them to help you as a professional. And there's nothing salesy about that when it's authentic, when it's true. It's just a matter of understanding the teacher's mental model and frame, and on a really nuanced level.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Steven Anderson, our stomachs are rolling and rumbling with, let's go for lunch.
Perfect, let's do it.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
That was really interesting.
If I think of more examples afterwards, I'll just send them to you, and you can say, after the class, you came with these examples. And,